Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Square Pizza Podcast, a podcast about making the good things about school even better. And really excited for our first official guest as we launch the podcast. So if you don't know Dr. Howard Fuller, an incredible person in civil rights, in education, in ed reform, and has really just done so much in his career to ensure that all families, particularly Black and brown families, have access to a quality education and have equal rights and equitable rights to accessing education. Just going to give you a quick snippet of his bio. I'm going to read the first paragraph and then link to the rest of it in the show notes just to give you some quick background about who Dr. Fuller is. So, Howard Fuller's career includes many years in both public service positions and the field of education. Dr. Fuller is a distinguished professor of education and founder-director of the Institute for the Transformation of Learning at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The mission of the Institute is to support exemplary education options that transform learning for children while empowering families, particularly low-income families, to choose the best options for their children. So again, Dr. Fuller was also the superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools from 1991 to 1995. Has just incredible experience both in America and in international countries as well in supporting communities and ensuring that all families have access to equitable education options. Just really honored that he would take time to help us launch the podcast, to share what he's learned and seen in his work as a Black man in education reform, and then cover wide-ranging things from college basketball to a few current events. And what we can all do to ensure all families have equitable rights to educational options. So please check out the show notes as well to learn more about Dr. Fuller. We're going to link his website, howardfuller.org, and some other information as well at the end of the episode in the show notes. But really take some time, listen deeply to who Dr. Fuller is, the great work that he's done, and really our vision for the podcast moving forward. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoy. Okay, we're recording. Hey, Kelsey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. All right, people. So incredibly excited and honored for today's Square Pizza podcast brought to you and cooked up by the Shrimp Co team. Kelsey and I have been really excited to kind of lead some of this work in the podcast moving forward, but I think our guest here today, we're just incredibly honored and humbled that he'd take time to speak about his experience, particularly in education, but also in the future of education, his vision for what, I think a perfect world of education looks like. So we're going to stop talking. We're going to welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Howard Fuller. How you doing today, sir?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much. And for those, two people in the world that don't know, Dr. Fuller has an incredible history in community organizing and civil rights and in public education really across the country. And so we really want to use the day to just shine light on his work, to talk about a lot of the issues that are important to us, and also learn about what's on his mind as he's working so deeply in communities and particularly within public education. So, Dr. Fuller, first things first, we know, I think a lot of time you've been spending in Milwaukee, and I think if our Googling is right, you played a little basketball back in the day. Is that true?
Yeah, actually I did. I mean, that's how I got through college, was on a basketball scholarship. Interestingly enough, I'm going to take a group of kids from our school tomorrow out to the university that I graduated from.
Okay.
Take about 20 kids to go see a game. So it should be fun.
Yeah, that's great. And
who are they playing?
Yeah, good question.
They're playing Carthage. So it's a long story. We're in the College Conference of Illinois, and I think we're only the Wisconsin. There's maybe two Wisconsin teams in that conference. And so they've been trying to get me to come out, and talk to the team. And so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to, take kids and expose them to the campus, let them see a game, have food and, just have fun tomorrow night.
Yeah, good for you. We, so, all right, we're already wildly off course, but I'm gonna keep this going, I think. So, small world, I think one of your degrees is from Case Western, is that right?
Yes.
Case West. And so I went to the College of Worcester and played football there. And the only time we made the playoffs was against Carthage, and they were the team that knocked us out of the playoffs my freshman year in playing. So I hope you guys get the W against them tomorrow.
Yeah, me too.
I know it's a little bit of a dark time in the NBA with obviously the unfortunate recent passing of Kobe, but we're assuming you're a Bucks fan with Giannis, and so how you feel about the team this year?
Yeah, I'm definitely a Giannis fan. I've been to, I think 3 or 4 games this year. I mean, I think the Bucks have like a really good team. Still think about what they're going to do in the playoffs. But, for any kind of basketball fan or any kind of human being, these last couple of weeks have been, pretty difficult, with 9 people losing their lives and,
right.
One being Kobe and his daughter, and then, the daughters of the other families. I mean, it was just horrible, but, these things happen like every day, unfortunately, in our communities. But, when something like that happens, it's still like sad and tragic.
Yeah, absolutely. No really easy way to say that other than the words you use. I think if nothing else, it's been a beautiful, I think, outpouring response from really athletes, but community members across the country. And I think to your point, not only just Kobe and his daughter for his platform, but also just all the families and the lives that were lost, but just the outpouring of love for everybody, given the tragic situation.
Yeah. There's not really a lot to say, but again, yeah, I'm definitely a Bucks fan, and I'm looking forward to the game with the Pelicans. It's either tonight or tomorrow night. I think it's tonight. So Giannis is going to go up against Zion. So.
Yeah, and Zion came out hot after the injury. He's been putting up some numbers back in the court already his rookie year.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal ball player, man. No doubt about it.
Really a freak. So,
I know who that is.
Yeah, we're still working on Kelsey with some of her NBA knowledge, but we're getting her there.
As a Carolina fan, I do know who Zion is.
Yeah, that's right. And she also went to Carolina, so has some pretty strong feelings for Zion. I think.
I'm a Tar Heel.
Yeah,
I'm a Tar Heel fan.
That's right.
That's my favorite college team, right? And I hate Duke. So
hey,
what else can you say?
Dr. Fuller's in. We got him and Kelsey going to be best friends now. Perfect. So, I actually want to pick up there, Dr. Fuller, because I know you have some deep experience in North Carolina, particularly in Durham with your work. I think, really starting out with Operation Breakthrough and the work that started in Durham and North Carolina, but really expanded as a real model and a successful model across the country. So can you just quickly give us some highlights about that work and what that work meant to you starting out in Durham and in North Carolina?
Yeah, so, I had gotten a master's degree, as you said, in social work from Western Reserve University. That was before it was Case Western Reserve.
Oh.
It used to be Western Reserve.
Okay,
Case
good
Tech.
note.
History there.
Yeah, good note.
Yeah, before they merged. And so I went to Reserve because it was only one or two schools at that time that had a social work focus on community organizing. Because before that, there were really two forms of social work, casework and group work. And I thought both of those help people manage oppression. And what I was interested in doing was trying to end oppression. And so Western Reserve had this new area of social work called community organizing. And so that's why I went there. And so after I got my master's degree in social work in community organizing, I'd worked at the Chicago Urban League for a year. And then the Great Society program, and particularly the Office of Economic Opportunity, created these community action programs all around the country. And one of them was in Durham called Operation Breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they wanted a Black person to run one of the neighborhood centers. They set up these 3 areas in Durham, area A, B, and C, really creative terms. A was the largest one, and it was in the Black community. B was in a poor white area of Durham, and C was out in the county. And so, I went down there and interviewed, and I'm a young black dude with a social work degree. They probably figure, he's pretty safe. And so, they hired me to run this neighborhood center.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd actually read the act itself. And one of the things in the act was says, you have to have feasible involvement of the poor. So I figured that meant two things. Number one, that you wanted to organize people so that they could, in fact, get politically involved and active.
Right.
And second thing was I thought it meant that poor people should get some of the money.
Yep. That
it shouldn't just be those of us with degrees who got hired. And so when I took over, I looked at the budget and I started trying to figure out how to, hire people who lived in the neighborhood. I started going door to door. That's actually how I met Ann Atwater. I don't know if you all know about the movie Best of Enemies.
Yep.
And so, Davison wrote the book, and then the movie came out, I think, last year. And so I was the one who knocked on Ann's door and, turned her into a community organizer. So I talk a lot about that in my book. But so I went down there, to do organizing, and I got somewhat of a reputation as being, this radical organizer. And people wanted me to come back to Chicago to organize on the West Side. But when people in North Carolina found out about that, they offered me a job with the North Carolina Fund to do the type of organizing that I was doing in Durham all over the state. So I was put in charge of 11 counties in North Carolina. And, I started organizing neighborhood groups, the same kind of issue-oriented neighborhood groups that I had organized in Durham. And so I developed a reputation in the state. They said that I was one of the most hated black people in the state of North Carolina at that time by the government and all of these people.
And was that because of your success in organizing and galvanizing support for what was needed?
Yeah, the kinds of things that we were doing, the kind of ways that we were challenging the status quo.
Right.
And one of the interesting things that happened was that, I had made a decision to train young black people to become organizers. And so I had gone around the state and interviewed and created and brought them into a program that the North Carolina Fund had started called the Community Action Technicians Program. But I expanded it and trained people to be organizers and put them in various communities throughout the state. And one of a couple of them actually were from Duke, and they went back to Duke after spending the summer organizing in these neighborhoods and decided that the education at Duke really didn't fit what they had learned. So,
because it was more theory rather than practical?
Yeah, or just there was back then there were no Afro-American studies programs. So their plan was to create an Afro-American studies program. And they ended up taking over an administration building at Duke. And it was a long story, but I ended up being in there with them. And out of that came the idea to create Malcolm X Liberation University.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1969, because I went to Durham like May 3rd or May 5th, 1965, like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
And I remember one of the first editorials I ever saw while I was down there was Jesse Helms, because he owned Channel 5 in Raleigh at that time. And he used to do these editorials where he had this dude, I think they called him Uncle Chuck, and they used to sit by a fireplace with a hunting dog and a gun, above the fireplace. And one of the first editorials they did was on Martin Luther King. So that was sort of my introduction to North Carolina. But anyway, after forming X Liberation University was started in Durham, and then we moved to Greensboro. And that's also then the first time I left the country. I went to Grenada. To Guyana. and was involved in trying to build communities out of the bush, as they called it. And then in 1971, I was invited to Tanzania to give a speech on Black education, and I ended up spending 30 days with a guerrilla column in Mozambique. They were fighting for freedom from the Portuguese. So when I came back, I organized. I was the lead organizer for African Liberation Day demonstration in 1972 that brought somewhere between 30 and 40,000 Black people to D.C. I actually have a video of that. It's on my website.
Okay. Yeah, we can put that in the show notes.
I'm sorry?
I know. I just said we'll definitely include that in the show notes when we send it out to folks.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you go to the website, it's howardfuller.org.
Yep.
And there's a lot of videos on there, of interviews and various things that I've done at different stages of my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously incredible for a number of reasons, and you could, I think, have spoken to it through some of, your book and some other things, at least that our team has read up on. But, within the community organizing space and in Durham and then taking you internationally and then back, like if you had to drill down a few lessons learned, what would you lift up from that experience and that part of your life?
It's interesting because I know it's going to sound kind of strange, but I really don't think about it a lot. I mean, okay. I'm one of these people who I'm trying to understand what I'm dealing with today and trying to see what's ahead. Yep. So I really don't spend a lot of time, thinking back. But, obviously when you have those types of experiences, where you begin to look at the United States from outside of the United States.
Right.
And you meet with all kinds of people who have a very different view of the role that we play in the world and what we do inside the United States. It's like an eye-opening experience, because I was sitting down with people who were literally, fighting revolutions. I mean, when I went into Mozambique with Frelimo, that wasn't a theoretical discussion on the college campus about revolution. It was
very real, right? Yeah, it was very real happening.
Yeah. And we were attacked by the Portuguese while I was in there. And so, you come out of that experience, you're never the same, right? Just because of the lessons that I learned about what does it really mean to say, I'm going to take up arms in order to fight for my liberation. What does it mean to go into Africa with a racial view of the world? And then you begin to see the class realities.
Yep.
So when you come back to the United States, I mean, the kind of work I was doing, I was already working with poor Black people.
Yep.
But you just see the work differently, and you realize what it means to have privilege in this country and what it means not to have privilege, not just in this country, but
sure.
Throughout the world.
And I think going back to what you said in terms of maybe like your working philosophy or day-to-day philosophy of kind of like one day at a time, does that framework help you just stay focused on what's ahead, the current challenges, and kind of keep marching given all the successes and just like how influential you've been in the space over your working time?
Honestly, man, like right now, it's just a frustrating existence for me, and let me explain.
Sure.
And if I'm not touching on your question, push me. So,
no.
So since I decided that I was going to retire from Marquette at the end of this year, I've really been spending a lot of time trying to organize, my speeches and papers, but I've been going through. My mother and other people kept tons of newspaper clippings about everything that I ever did.
Right.
But
moms are good at that. Moms are real good at that. Moms and grandmas got it for days. They'll surprise you with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So my mother, bless her soul, did this. But like back in July of 1981, I was involved with creating an organization called Coalition for Justice for Ernest Lacy. Mm-hmm. It was a young Black man who was killed by the police with the same chokehold that killed Eric Gardner. And so I'm going through all these newspaper clippings, right? And then night before last, I heard about a young black man being killed out in a shopping center out in the suburbs. And I didn't, think much about it. And then it turns out that he's the younger brother of one of the graduates of our school. And so talking to her last night and this morning, and she was just, beside herself. And I'm thinking about this happened in 1981, and here we are in 2020.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then
not the progress we'd all
reading,
want, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, in reading Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, one of the things that he says very clearly is that racism is not something that's tangential to American society. It's woven into the fabric of the society, and it has a certain level of permanence. And unfortunately, the way all of the things that I've been through, and you try to understand, okay, what difference has this made, right? And it's hard to see the difference, because the reality of so many people that I interact with and the kids at our school and so forth is, objectively, it's difficult to see how things have changed for the poorest people in this country. And so that, so you're like trying to figure out, okay, what do I do today? What do I do tomorrow? How do I do something differently? What do I need to be doing differently? So I don't know. So I just stay focused on whatever the work is that I'm involved in now. Obviously, there are lessons that I learned from the past.
Yep.
That help me as I try to do this work today. But I really don't dwell on it a lot. And it's only because I'm going through these newspaper clippings.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good time to reflect, if nothing else.
Yeah, and looking at all this stuff I've been involved in my lifetime, it's kind of, I don't know, man. It's hard to deal with, frankly.
I mean, I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability. I mean, I think, from my perspective as an individual, but as a white male who's been in public education, but also, often look to you and others in the space, as true visionaries and leaders. I can say without any BS how much you've meant to all the work I've done and that others have done, I think, across the country. So if nothing else, I just want to extend my appreciation for that.
Thank you.
And then, I think it's, perhaps maybe jumping around a little bit, but sticking to that point, like around success and outcomes, because surely, like if you look at your school is obviously making incredible results, and other things you've touched have had incredible outcomes, but understanding what you're saying at the macro level as well. And knowing this is probably a complicated answer, but like, where's the push, or where is the answer? And we know it's not a silver bullet, and given all that you've learned and all that you've done, and if you really want to reflect and say, like, you know what, man, like we crushed this, or like this is what would need to happen for us to completely change what it looks like to support or eradicate racism in America. Like, what's the answer?
I don't think I don't have an answer, because I don't think there is any political will in this country to radically change the dynamics that impact the poorest people. And so for me, like one of the things I ended up saying at the end of my book is that I no longer view education as a systemic change.
Yeah, I saw that.
I just view that I'm trying to save as many lives as I can.
Yeah. You said rescue mission, right?
Huh?
You said you kind of went from systemic change to a rescue mission for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I realized that over all of these years when I've been fighting for systemic change, or even thought at one point you could, have a revolution, however that would be defined, at this moment in my life when I have a much shorter horizon to try to do anything, it's just really clear to me that when I go into our school every day, because this year I'm actually teaching.
Wow, that's
every
incredible.
Monday, 5 seniors that I'm working with. And
is this the first year you've been teaching since the school opened?
Well, I used
kind of
to,
given your
like,
other priorities, right, and commitments?
yeah, no, what I would do is that ever since we started the school back in 2004, um, I would teach every week during Black History Month.
Okay.
I do something with the freshmen. I do something with the sophomores, juniors, and seniors, But this year, what I'm actually doing is I'm actually every Monday, from 9:20 to 11:45, I have these, and it's a Black identity and Black history course, and so the Black identity part was really dealing with key concepts pertaining to race. First of all, defining race, and then talking about different forms of racism, institutional, overt, covert, and then talking about prejudice, discrimination, and there's about 23 key concepts that we spent time with. And then the way I decided to do the Black history thing, instead of doing a survey or talk about Black history generally or picking a period to study like slavery, I decided to use Brown versus the Board of Education as like the thing that we're studying. And in order to get to Brown versus the Board of Education, you have to know about Sarah Roberts, you have to know about the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the 14th Amendment, Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Mendez case in California before we actually get to the 5 cases that make up Brown. And so what I got them doing is reading primary documents, the actual court cases, reading the actual legislation of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And it's really difficult for them. And I know it's difficult, right? But I'm pushing them, right, to say you can learn. And by using, these cases, as you all know, it's not just about the legal, it's not just a reflection of the legal arguments. The legal arguments were a reflection of the culture of the country.
What was happening at that time. Yeah, that's right.
At that point in time, right?
Yep.
And so then I was to try to do is to get them to see what is the relationship between this and what it is that you're dealing with today.
And do you love being back in the classroom? I know you're at Marquette for so long, but given your other commitments, like being in the school on a day-to-day basis, interacting with literally the youth and the future of America, how does that, is that a good place for you now in your career?
Yeah, it is. I was in the school all the time anyway, and especially, they named the school after me last year, but I was in the school, whenever I was in the city.
Yep.
But to have, as you all know, to have a class that you are required to teach.
That's why I loved how specific you were with the time, because only teachers know exactly what time the bell rings and the bell ends and what's about to happen. And like you can visualize where you're standing as soon as that bell rings and like when the exit ticket needs to come out. Like only a teacher can appreciate that.
Plans for this amount of time.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and especially because I'm still working with the Freedom Coalition for Charter Schools. Actually, planning a demonstration right now in Vegas for February 19th in South Carolina on the 25th.
Okay.
But
February 25th in South Carolina.
February 19th.
I'm sorry.
You said February 25th in South Carolina.
Yeah, in Charleston.
Charleston. Okay. Good.
Yeah. So, but to go back to your central point, I think when you're in a school every day, there's certain things that you come to grips with that's different than if you're just running around the country talking about education. Right?
Sure.
First of all, just how hard the work is.
Yep.
The work that good teachers are doing, and committed teachers and principals and whomever, that work, if you're in a school like ours, is difficult beyond words. Because you're dealing with young kids every day. 300 kids walk into that building, each one of them with their own issues, their own, whatever ever happened to them the night before, or whatever went on Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram or wherever they're using.
TikTok. Don't forget about TikTok, the new one.
Yeah, whatever. Right? and you know, and the things that many of them are dealing with. Ours is a high school from 9 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
So we got kids that are even living at home. They're living with, you know, they're living around with other kids and foster homes. You know, like 22% of our ninth graders have IEPs. And, you know, and and so teachers are in there every day trying to figure out how do we facilitate learning, you know, for these kids, right?
Yep.
And you know, and so every day something is going to go wrong, right? It has to, because of the nature of what you're dealing with. And by something going wrong, I mean some kid goes off, or
Yep.
you know, there's parents, blah blah, all of that, right? So the reality of like talking about education reform, however people want to discuss it, it's one thing to have all these conferences, which are good. I go to them, you know, you try to learn something, or you try to give something if you to speak. But when you get back into the building, or you get back into the educational environment, the challenges are enormous, right? But there's nothing more important, at least in my way of viewing the world, than taking on those challenges.
That's right.
And trying to figure out how do we best serve these kids.
And then taking those learnings, right, from the talks and the conferences and the other great school leaders back into the community. So it's not just kind of talk or a headline, but actually getting to the 30 kids in the classroom that you're seeing every day.
Right. Or, you know, trying to figure out what is it that people are doing somewhere else that you see as being successful,
Yep.
that you might be able to use in your school. Knowing that things don't just transfer, you know, that way.
Right.
You know, but you're always looking for different ideas that people have that seem to be working, so that you can try to make it work for your kids.
Are you excited about anything that you've seen out there right now?
Not really. I don't. I mean, I don't, because I don't mean it like the way it's.
No.
I mean, I know that there's a lot of people out there doing, you know, really good work. It's just that I'm looking at it through the lens of the group of kids that I'm working with, and through the lens of our school and what goes on every day. And so my honest thing is hard for me to be excited really about anything, but that's not to say that I've not been impressed with some things that I've seen, because one of the advantages of being invited to go around and speak and all that stuff is you do get a chance to interact with some really, you know, intelligent and smart people, creative people, and you get a chance to, you know, go into schools and see kids and talk to them and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess everything is for me right now is sort of tempered by the reality of what I see in my community and in my school every day.
And I kind of want to stick there, Dr. Fuller, because I think from, you know, our research and what we've seen, particularly for your guys' school, like by all means, at least with graduation rates and placement, you know, you guys are incredibly successful with the results you're able to produce at your school. I know from, I think, listening to you from the 8 Black Hands podcast and a few others, you spoke really intentionally about single site schools versus growing charters or replicating charters. So can you kind of speak to like how you're balancing the incredible results at your current school with your thoughts around single site charters and like a massive CMO, or just growing to 5 schools rather than 1?
Right. Well, you know, first of all, I think we're getting, I would say, good results. I mean, I think it is a good thing that for the last 7 years, 100% of our seniors have been accepted into college.
Mm-hmm.
But accepting is not the same as going, and going is not the same as completing.
Graduate, yeah.
And so even though we're a little bit above the national average for low-income, first-generation students, the reality is that if you include community schools or voc tech schools or whatever, that, you know, the graduation rate is still at something like 11 or 12% after 6 years.
After
so
6 years of
probably
college.
if
Yep.
you include 2-year colleges in the data.
Sure.
Um, and we're somewhere like 16 or 18% or something like that. And we're we're working on it, but we've also understood that like we're going to continue to push to try to get our kids accepted into college, but we're trying to get a new building for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the things we want to try to look at is, in addition to getting kids accepted into college, can we also make sure that they leave with some type of certificate, maybe in culinary arts, for example, or
Yep.
something like that. And right now, like these 5 seniors that I'm working with, all 5 of them are also taking college courses at UWM right now, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So we're trying to do all of those things, man. But it's just that when you get kids coming in to the 9th grade, reading at a 3rd and 4th grade level, as about 70% of our kids do, your ability to get them to get a 21 on their ACT is, that's an enormous hurdle.
That's a lot, right?
But you can get a 16 or 17, and then you can get them accepted in, UW Whitewater, and like right now we got 4 kids at Grambling, and and 3 kids at Jackson State and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all important. But I just worry about all of the kids that they leave our school and they're struggling in life, right? Because one of the things that our ex-principal said is that we want kids to go to college, but ultimately what we want kids to do is to be productive citizens, right? That you don't live with mama unless you want to, kind of thing.
Pay taxes.
And that just continues to be like a real struggle every day. And then to get to one of the points you made, see, I think the charter movement, or whatever you call it, has made a huge mistake by focusing in a lot of ways when it comes to resources and stuff on the networks and the people who got 10 schools and 20 schools and all of that. So it's like, we don't really want to have 10 schools, right? We just want to have one good high school for the community that we serve.
Yep.
But it's such a financial strain because of the amount of money that we get from the state versus what Milwaukee Public Schools get. So, I just feel like there ought to be a place in this movement for people who don't want 10 schools or 40 schools all around the country or whatever it is. We just want to have one really good school in that community that serves the kids in that community. And I think where we're headed, it's going to be very, very hard for schools like that to survive.
I think it's an incredible point because, as you've said, and a little bit from our experience too, is when, you're at conferences or maybe with national funders that every word out of their mouth is scale or reform or silver bullet. But to your point, when there's one principal or one school leader just crushing the game or doing the best they can in one community, and they're getting approached by, maybe national funders or even local funders to scale. And, sometimes it's, hey, take the money to scale or no money at all. And to your point, that's a really frustrating position to be in when they have the ability to just double down in their community.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, this is not, I'm not arguing against networks or anything. I'm just making the point that if you step back and look at, where this whole thing came from and how it started, and to see where we are today, I can only speak for myself.
Yep.
I really was not back there thinking about large networks and all of that. And one of the things I worry about, quite honestly, is that, well, 2 things. Number one, because charter schools are working so hard to try to prove that they're public, we've adopted a whole bunch of stuff that we were trying to get away from. In other words, like, more and more we're looking like the place that we tried to escape from. And I think that's a critical mistake.
Yep.
The second thing, that because of the way that we've structured accountability systems and so forth, and I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be accountability, but there are a lot of people out here who are serving kids well that can never be a part of the charter process because of the way that the accountability measurement and stuff.
And specifically around state tests is what you're speaking to?
Yeah, tests and a whole bunch, all kinds of restrictions and so forth. Like I was at
even just the capital to get something up and running, right?
Yeah, but like I was at this conference 3 years ago. It's called Alternative Accountability Network, I think. And I was sitting in a workshop with a young woman who had started a school for young sex workers who were trying to lead that way of life. You could just see the phenomenal work that they were doing, but there's no way that they could become a charter school.
Right.
Because of who they were serving and how they were trying to serve them, and you know what I mean. And I just think that again, you always have to be careful about becoming the new status quo. And I understand, like, you have to do certain things to institutionalize a function or a process or service. But in institutionalizing, you begin to be self-protective, and you begin to, like, the further you get away from the reason why you got started in the first place, the harder it is to remember that.
And it goes back to what you said. Go ahead.
No, I try to talk to people about being committed to purpose instead of the method to get to purpose. But I know that's very difficult to do.
No, and I was just going to co-sign what you said earlier about political will, like that school in particular, for example. Like if there's political will to, ensure that school gets a charter license or is adopted by a district, if that model's working so well, the barrier for entry shouldn't be so challenging for them since they're changing so many lives for the better for kids. That hurdle shouldn't exist. If anything, it should be easier for them to continue to operate their schools and do the good work that they're doing for the kids and the families they're serving.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. Gonna respect your time here. I want to go on maybe like one, larger topic, and then give you a few maybe lighter rapid fire questions at the end. But we're broadcasting today from Charlotte, North Carolina, kind of going back to your Durham connections. And Charlotte, at least in 1971 with the Swan case, was, I think, doing their best to look at school integration and really do what they could. And we can maybe not so much debate, but just discuss the merits of that. Then, of course, went back to pretty serious school and racial segregation and socioeconomic segregation in 97. I mean, you've seen it from so much, from running a school and then also from communities, I think in Milwaukee when you were the SOOP, but also in other communities that have made attempts, whether valid or not, in school or student segregation. Can you just speak to like what you know about, not only what you know about that, but what you've seen as successful or not successful in that route?
Yeah, like, this whole issue of integration is a difficult one for me. I finally read Simple Justice, and in preparing, to work with the kids, I spent, and I put together this presentation that I gave last summer out at the National Charter School Conference on Brown versus the Board of Education.
Okay.
And so probably the last year and a half, I've been deeply engaged in studying Brown and looking at, what were people really talking about in Clarendon, South Carolina, right? Because the struggle in Clarendon didn't start around integration. It started to get a school bus, and because the NAACP went through a number of different iterations, it was really in 1950 when they made a decision to no longer focus on trying to make separate equal, but to really begin to focus on integration, that led to the 5 cases. Because each one of those cases, I mean, the Delaware one being the exception, obviously, but each one of those cases, when you look into what the struggles were that Black people were engaged in at that moment in time, it's hard to argue that those people saw integration necessarily in the same way as the NAACP ultimately saw this. And, you know, we could debate that for a long time.
Yep.
But if you read like the Lost Education of Horace Tate, and, you know, it was talking about a speech that Martin Luther King gave at their state conference, I forgot what year it was, where he said that, you know, that there's a lot of white people and Black people who look at integration in terms of the mingling of numbers or something like that, but that I want to look at this in terms of power, and that I'm not trying to integrate myself out of power. I mean, so what I'm saying is that, you know, when we use these words like segregation, desegregation, and integration, we use them like interchangeably, but they're not. And then when we talk about what has been the impact on the Black community of integration or desegregation, what do we gain? What do we lose? And so, you know, I'm one of these people who believe that no one in this country should ever be prevented from going somewhere or sitting down somewhere or whatever because of their race.
Right.
But when you look at a situation like what we have in the community in which I live, talking about integration of schools is really a moot issue, unfortunately, because there's not enough white people here to integrate. And so at a certain point in time, I don't oppose people who want to fight for integrated schools.
Sure.
But I'm like Judge Robert Carter. You know, if you read Shades of Brown, you know, Judge Robert Carter, who had the responsibility to put the social science literature before the court, which is in footnote 11 of the Brown decision, he in essence said that, look, a lot of this integration talk is a middle-class Black people's issue. That for most poor Black children, we're going to have to figure out how can they get a great education in situations that are going to be predominantly Black in their lifetime.
Right.
And that's where I am, right? And it just drives me up a wall when a Diane Ravitch or whoever these people are, you know, and some of these elitist ass white people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, you know, start talking about getting rid of charter schools, you know, and all of this, and it's not promoting integration. When people have been in these communities forever, and if all of a sudden a charter school comes into that community and provides a decent education for that child or those children, how are you then going to like accuse them of not fostering integration?
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't know. I just think a lot of the way that we approach this discussion, you know, it's problematic for me. But when I talk about this, people think that I'm, you know, anti, you know, integration. No, what I am is I'm anti-denying poor Black and brown children a quality education. I'm anti-denying their families the power to choose.
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, I want quality schools, but I also want families to be able to choose, those to have that power to choose. And if they choose an integrated school, I want them to have access to it. But I also want them to have access to a school that's predominantly Black or brown and serving the needs of that community. I mean, when we did the demonstration in LA a month ago, I was at a school in, I forgot the section of LA, and this school, like, you know, was in the heart of a poor, or relatively poor Black and brown environment, and 30% of the kids they were serving were homeless, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for me, for somebody to roll up in their school talking about, you know, I got problems with you because your school's not integrated. It is. I mean, but they're serving 30% of the kids who are homeless. They're doing phenomenal things in that community.
Right.
How can you be opposed to that?
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't know.
No, I appreciate your thoughts, and I know it's so nuanced, and I think we've seen even, in the 12 years I've been in Charlotte, we've seen it from, I think, all different races and socioeconomic backgrounds of people around, like, what happens if we integrate schools, or when, and what's integrated enough, and, like, why can't schools in those communities, there's already excellent pockets of excellence happening. Maybe we should just continue those. And I think the nuance is really important, because I think what we're seeing in so much rhetoric is that we say integration equals silver bullet, but we know that may or may not always be the case, given the varieties and complexities in just America, which you spoke about earlier, but also just in public education. So I appreciate your nuance there.
But I think another interesting thing is even how we define public education, right? Because my argument is that the Milwaukee public school system is not public education. I think it's a delivery system for public education.
Okay.
And I'm a strong supporter of public education. I just think there needs to be different delivery systems, for the families that we're trying to serve. Because the one best system that Tyack talked about in his book, One Best System, we've been searching for the one best system forever.
Right.
And there ain't no one best system that's going to work for our
And by
children.
delivery system, you're talking like district schools, magnet schools, charters?
Or the school board that has control over all of the schools.
Right.
Right. And the district is the delivery system that we use, that there are no other kinds of delivery systems
or choice
that would work, to ensure that the public gets educated, right? Because public education is like an idea. And then the question is, okay, how do we deliver on that idea? And the notion that the district structure is the only way that we can deliver public education is insane.
We've got data that shows that may not be the only way, right? We know it's not the only way. We're going to be data driven about it.
We know for a fact that it just doesn't work for all kids.
Right. Yep, 100%. All right, we want to respect your time, man. I could talk to you for 6 hours, but no, you probably got better things to do than talk to us for 6 hours. So let me get you off with maybe 2 quick questions. So, given all your experience, just one actionable thing our listening audience should do by the end of the week or the end of the month to advance quality education for their communities.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on where they are at this moment in time. Like if they are an educator, then obviously to continue to get in there every day to do the best that you can, or even better, to serve the kids. If you are an elected official, instead of towing the line for the teachers union or me or anybody else, to have an independent thought and begin to try to understand how can we radically change things. If you're a parent, to continue to fight for your children. I mean, to continue to demand what is right for your children. So the one thing that a person can do will depend upon the perch that a person has at this moment in time. Where are you? What is your job, or what is your status in life? And from that perch, what could you do that would change the lives of some children? Even if you don't change the life of every child in your community, right, what could you do that would change the lives of at least some of the children? Yep. That would help change the trajectory of their lives. And so for me, instead of me saying, well, you should do this, my thing is, given where you are, what is your best way to try to advance the interests of our kids?
So know where you are as a person, as a human, and then know what you're able to control in terms of best serving one kid or however many kids you can.
Yeah, that's what I see.
That's perfect. Thank you. Kelsey's going to get you out of here on one last question, Dr. Fuller.
What's giving you hope about the future of public education?
Not much. I'm not how can I put this? I'm a pessimist, and I've been, unfortunately, but my pessimism doesn't keep me home. In other words,
Right.
even though I'm a pessimist, I get up and try to fight every day. It's like in Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, he was talking to this black woman. I think she was in Macomb, Mississippi, and he was saying, look, why do you all? It was in 1964. Why do you all get up every day, like to fight? White people in charge of the guns, they're in charge of the economy, they're in charge of everything. And she said, well, you know what? She said that I'm old and I don't speak for everybody, but God put me on this earth to harass white people. And so for me, it's like, God put me on this earth to harass people in power, to because in the book he also talks about how you have to fight, like even when victory is not possible, because not to fight is to co-sign on the injustice, right? So there's not a lot that gives me hope other than the people, my kids, and I see what they can do if they're given a chance. I see what they can do and what they can overcome if they interact with people who love them and care for them and are willing to help them. So I guess the thing that gives me hope are the kids and the educators who work with those kids, who are committed to those kids and are going to do great things that will change the trajectory of these individual kids' lives.
Yep.
So to the extent that I have hope, that's where I see it.
That's great, and that's powerful. All right, I lied. I'm sorry. I'm going to do one more quick one. If I asked you what square pizza reminds you of, what would you say?
If you ask me what?
What a square
Say that again?
What a square pizza remind you of?
He's stumped.
That's an interesting question.
Speechless.
It doesn't. I can't really answer that question. I don't know. I know that's your thing, right? So obviously y'all have thought about this for you.
Did you not have square pizza in school, like during lunch?
No, actually I didn't, because I didn't like pizza. Even when I was in college, I used to order pizza without cheese, but it was always it wasn't square; it was triangle.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hopefully the connection at some point. I think a lot of us, square pizza, at least in my public school, was the best day of the week and the most fun time we had in public school. So always been interesting to hear how other people approach square pizza.
It was served every Friday at my school, so it was a good day.
Yeah, no, we never had that. Maybe it's a generational thing or a region thing or something, but we never had square pizza. We didn't have any kind of pizza, actually.
Talk about delivery service. We're going to have to figure out the research of cafeteria food and square pizza in public schools, maybe. Dr. Fuller, man, we can't thank you enough, given just all your work and just everything you've done, your leadership across the country and fighting for a better tomorrow for all of us. So just thank you so much again.
And your time today. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You all have a great day.
Great. You as well. Thank you, sir.
Hey, guys, this is Greg. Thanks again for checking out the podcast episode. Feel free to show us some love on social media. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, at Shermco, SCHERMCO, and hashtag squarepizzapod. Would love to see your reviews and connect with you there. Stay in touch for the next episode.